Hi everybody. In my absence today, you're going to do some work identifying parallelism in your table groups. But before I cut you loose to do that, I wanted to make sure that we recapped what we talked about on Friday, just in case either it didn't stick or the conversation about parallelism left you confused. Because of all the rhetorical devices, this is the one that tends to be the trickiest. So just for some purpose, today, where I really want you to be is at a place where you can identify parallelism. So if I give you a piece of text, you can look at that text and you can find the parallelism. You can pull it out on your own. And then what we'll move towards is the analytical sort of evaluative piece where we have conversations around why is it effective and why did the speaker choose to incorporate it. But we can't have those conversations if you aren't able to find it in the first place. And so that's where we're going to start today. So I just wanted to do a quick recap with you so you hear from me again exactly what parallelism looks like. So I have some examples here, just some very basic ones so you can see. If you remember, parallelism is when writers use a similar grammatical structure. And oftentimes when they make this grammatical structure the same, it creates this rhythm. So Mary likes hiking, swimming, and bicycling. So the fact that in this sentence all of our verbs end in ing makes this a parallel statement. We have three gerunds here. It's parallel. Similar here. Instead of hiking, swimming, bicycling, Mary likes to hike, to swim, and to ride a bicycle. To hike, to swim, to ride. So we turn the verbs instead into infinitives, which creates that parallel rhythm. Okay? If we look at this sentence, it's not an incorrectly written sentence, but it's not parallel, so it's incorrect in that nature. The production manager was asked to write his report quickly, accurately, and in a detailed manner. So these two words are parallel because they're adverbs that end in ly, but we lose that rhythm here in the last piece of the series, in a detailed manner. So I can change that very quickly. I can correct it by saying the production manager was asked to write his report quickly, accurately, and thoroughly, which makes these three adverbs parallel. So you're not going to be given just single sentences with verbs that are the same, though. You're going to have a little bit more complex tasks and texts. And so I want to look at two short excerpts before you work with your groups, just to point out some things that I think you might run into. So if we look at another excerpt from Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, I told you on Friday that very often when you see repetition, you'll find parallelism after. And while that's true in some cases, it's not always true. And so what I'm a little worried about is that you're going to see and you're going to pull out the repetition, and then you'll say, well, this must be parallelism, and this must be parallelism, and everything that comes after each piece of repetition must be parallelism. But that's not always the case. We have to look at each word to really determine if it is or not. And so if I go back and look here, as long as the, as long as our. So I have a little bit of repetition still here, and then sort of a qualifying adjective, the, our. And then I have this word, the Negro, and our bodies. So here I have a singular noun. Here I have a plural noun. And if something's parallel, either they will both be singular or they'll both be plural. And then following this word, this here, I have another verb, is the victim, and then a prepositional phrase of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. Whereas after this noun here, I have in a positive phrase, heavy with the fatigue of travel, that explains more about bodies. So in reality, neither one of these is parallel in nature. They have some similar constructs, but they're not true parallelism. So please don't think that just because something comes after repetition that it's automatically parallel. There is an example of parallelism in this short excerpt, and it's right here in this line where he says, we can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity. So we have these verbs: stripped, robbed. Both verbs end in ed. And then we have prepositional phrases: of their selfhood, of their dignity. As long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity. So we have these sort of rhythmic statements that mirror each other. But otherwise, this is the best example of parallelism in this paragraph. So please don't think that just because it comes after the repetition that it's automatically parallelism. The next example I want to look at comes from President Obama's initial inaugural address back in 2009. You're going to look at another excerpt from this speech, and so I just wanted to get you started with how he begins the speech. And so he says, "My fellow citizens, I stand here today humbled by the task before us, grateful for the trust you have bestowed, mindful of the sacrifices borne by our ancestors. I thank President Bush for his service to our nation, as well as the generosity and cooperation he has shown throughout this transition." Now, as I read this paragraph, I was mindful that my voice became very rhythmic here at the beginning. Humbled by the task before us, grateful for the trust you have bestowed, mindful of the sacrifices borne by our ancestors. And so I hear these phrases: humbled by the task, grateful for the trust, mindful of the sacrifices. Now, it's not perfectly parallel because our verbs aren't perfect mirrors of each other: humbled, grateful, mindful. But we have this rhythm of a verb followed by a prepositional phrase: humbled by the task, grateful for the trust, mindful of the sacrifices. Now, you notice that I didn't just highlight this whole section because before us, you have bestowed, and borne by our ancestors. Those aren't parallel in nature, but these pieces that I highlighted in green more closely parallel each other. And then there's another short piece in this paragraph here. 44 Americans have now taken the presidential oath. The words have been spoken during rising tides of prosperity and the still waters of peace. And so again, we have this short piece of rising tides of prosperity, still waters of peace. So an adjective, rising, still. A noun, tides, waters, plural nouns, both end in S. And then two prepositional phrases: of prosperity, of peace. The rising tides of prosperity and the still waters of peace. And what I appreciate about both of these examples is that they don't come with the repetition beforehand. And so sometimes they're just these short phrases that are added that add sort of this rhythmic quality to the overall piece. So your task now is to take another piece of this same speech and with your table groups to find as much of the parallelism, and there's plenty to find, that you can. So I hope this helped you know better sort of what you're looking for. Good luck. See you tomorrow.